Governmental Relations. Trustee Norton, if you will please convene that committee.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Day. Will the Committee on Government Relations please come to order? We will now hear public comment from those who have signed up to address agenda items today coming before the Committee on Governmental Relations. The speakers will have 3 minutes each. Speakers will hear a buzzer signaling their time has concluded, and at that time we ask that you please yield the microphone to the next speaker. In any order that you choose, the speakers are Tina Givens, Mimi Bommersbach, Carla Castillo, Maya Brose, and Tessie Reese.
I'm here today because our students are dying.
Could you identify yourself, please?
I'm Dr. Mimi Bommersbach, Chico State University.
Thank you.
I'm here today because our students are dying. Another suicide last week at Chico State. And it's ironic and hypocritical the way administrators immobilize to provide immediate counseling services to everyone on campus following a very public tragedy, while every day we minimize and we normalize the private ongoing tragedies of the lives of our students, the homelessness, the hunger, acute anxiety, immobilizing feelings of helplessness and hopelessness leading to depression. We serve an incredibly resilient but challenged student population. They're hungry to make a better place for themselves in our world and in our society, and I feel we're failing them. Executive Order 1053 requires that the CSU provide mental health services to our students. Why has Executive Order 1053 remained unfunded? Why do we refuse to hire counselors into permanent faculty positions? Why do we wait for students to die to get 1 or 2 positions? Why are we increasing student fees and promising more robust mental health services, yet not delivering on these promises in an effective way? At my campus, Chico State, we're proposing a student fee increase of nearly $200. This significant increase, we were told, will yield 1 additional counseling position. This would be laughable if it were not so tragic. 1 temporary counseling position will make no noticeable difference. Students will still have to wait 3 or 4 weeks to obtain non-urgent care. Thus, students with panic attacks, mild to moderate depression, students immobilized and desperate but not yet articulating suicidal thoughts are left to wait it out or be referred out off campus. And being referred off campus for mental health treatment is a nightmare in and of itself. How many students are suffering and languishing in this way in our system? Thousands. How many are dropping out? That's what we need to find out. To increase graduation rates in the CSU, we need to double the number of faculty counseling positions in the CSU. Senator Richard Pan has introduced a bill, Senate Bill 968, requiring the California State University to comply with International Counseling Service Accreditation minimum standards to hire 1 counselor for every 1,000 students. Chancellor White, you talk about a moral imperative. Our students are our most precious commodity. They deserve to live. They deserve our support. I'm Dr. Mimi Bommersbach. I'm a clinical psychologist and faculty at Chico State University.
Thank you, Dr. Bommersbach.
Hello, my name is Maya Brose. I am a lecturer at Cal State LA, Nutritional Science. I came here from teaching a class just to speak to you to address the need to increase the number of tenured faculty in the CSU system. 60% of CSU instructional faculty are lecturer faculty on temporary contracts. Many so-called temporary contracts faculty have been teaching in the CSU system for their whole careers. The lack of access to full-time tenure-track professors harms the 447,000 students who rely on CSU for quality public higher education. Since lecturer faculty must then naturally search for long-term stable teaching positions, the turnover among lecturer faculty is high. Over the course of 5 years, for example, about half of the lecturers leave, And what that means for students is that about half of the professors they had their freshman year, they're gone by the time they graduate. With that said, about 50 years of research shows that building a relationship with the professor enriches the student experience and in turn helps them learn and become better students. The difference between tenure-line faculty and lecturers is often not the ability, credentials, degrees, service to students, or capacity for doing research, but instead simply the nature of their employment contracts, which creates instability for both the lecturer faculty and for the students. Having a large underclass of workers with low status for no good reason is a consequence of the long, slow ride of the state funding for CSU. It is a strictly money-saving choice that CSU management has used to cope with budget shortfalls and chronic budget uncertainty. Those choices need to change direction because our students, they deserve faculty who are treated like professionals and not like Uber drivers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. The other speakers?
Should have put these on first. Good afternoon. I'm Tessie Reese, a Unit 2 Chair for CSUEU, and I work at San Diego State. I'm speaking at governmental subject today because this was brought to my attention, and if I'm speaking in the wrong committee, I'm sure someone will let me know. This was a joint informational hearing of the Senate Health and Senate Education Committees that was held at the Capitol on Wednesday, March 14th. Various speakers regarding different colleges, CSU, UC, Medical, and Ray Morella, the Director of Student Programs here for the CSU, was one of the attendees. And I just wanted to bring up a little bit of information that was told, or this information, joint informational hearing. It was to talk about college health, college students, and the access that they have for care. And it was really interesting to me as I was reading through this, and one of the biggest things that they talked about was the different types of insurances that our students have or don't have. And I think the biggest need about whether or not our students who are medical eligible are getting those services, especially if they're out of network, or even our students who have insurances who are out of network when they come from out of state, or even from different counties when they come to school. And one of the biggest things that they asked about was the need of what our students have. And so they talked about health coverage arrangements for our college students. And they talked about that they get them in 4 ways. One was a dependence about the parents' health plan, which they have, typically employer-based or individually purchased family coverage. The second was through Medicaid or Medi-Cal, which is known here in California. The third is through student health plans offered by the university or college the student attends, or fourth, by purchasing coverage through the individual market, either directly from a health plan or health insurers through Covered California. And there was one point that it stated that there's no state-produced data on college student-specific coverage arrangements, which was puzzling to me because we have 400 and some thousand students in our system, and we aren't really sure about what kind of coverage our students have. And that's kind of frightening, because our students are being turned away in our health centers because we don't have, number one, enough people to see them, the facility to see them, aging buildings, which we hear all the time. And so many of our students are farmed out, referred out, because we don't have the ability to see them. And that's troubling to me because it also went on to talk about how we provide coverage to our students. And it specifically went on to say about student health centers, and I'm almost out of time here, and it talked about the average student fee that the students pay, varying from $272 average. Long Beach is $90. and it's all over the place. So in closing, it really was talking about how we can get our students. I know that my campus in particular has talked about, as their students come in, to actually find out whether they have insurance, and if they don't, have a resource specialist that the UCs use. And I know it's going across the system here, and I'm almost done. I'll stop in just a second. But I think we need to take a serious look about what we are offering our students and how we can do better. There was this tragic topic that was just spoken about, and now students come to us at the health center as well. So we really need to take a big global look at this and see how we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the other speakers present? If not, then we will conclude. Thanks to all those who addressed the board. It is now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda. Are there any objections to the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. On today's discussion item, we had one information item. The item is on the state legislative update. Vice Chancellor Garrett Ashley will introduce the item. Garrett.
Thank you, Trustee Norton. Since our last meeting in January, more than 2,000 new bills have been introduced in the legislature. Assistant Vice Chancellor Kathleen Shavira and her team in Sacramento have worked hard to review these bills, giving special attention to legislation that may impact the CSU. Reviewing hundreds of bills in a short time period is a challenge. The Sacramento team has done a great job collecting information from legislative offices and engaging experts here in the Chancellor's office to produce the initial analysis and positions before you today. Earlier this month, we met with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Governmental Relations Committee to present our analysis and recommended positions. During her report, Kathleen will highlight some of these bills and review budget advocacy events that we have held in recent weeks. As you can see, our opening slide here is a photo from our most recent event, the Roundtable Luncheon held last week, co-hosted by the Chancellor and Senator Tony Atkins. I now turn this over to Kathleen.
Thank you, Garrett. I will begin with a legislative update. As we noted in our last meeting, the legislature returned to the second year of the 2017-18 session in January, and with the new year came the opportunity to introduce new legislation. Excuse me. February 16th was the deadline to introduce any new bills, and as Garrett noted, my staff has been very busy engaging with legislative offices and our issue area experts in the Chancellor's office to develop an understanding of each bill's intents and impacts. Of the nearly 2,300 bills introduced by that date, we're tracking over 430. Your agenda identifies approximately 40 bills that we believe may impact the CSU. And your board report is organized to reflect a numeric listing of the newly introduced Senate and Assembly bills, followed by a numeric listing of two-year bills, those introduced last year and that continue through the legislative process. We saw several bill trends this year, including bills related to affordability, student well-being, and the prevention of sexual harassment and assault. We see an ongoing interest in legislation to address college affordability and financial aid. One measure, AB 2306, increases the period of time that a community college student may receive a Cal Grant award from 4 years to 6, and provides that this shall carry over to any 4-year qualifying institution. Another bill, AB 2563, implements a financial aid book advance program that would provide credit to an institution's campus bookstore so that students receiving Cal Grant B or Cal Grant C awards are able to purchase books before financial aid funds are dispersed to students. These bills are noted on pages 5 and 6 of your agenda item. Bills related to student well-being include measures to address housing insecurity, food insecurity, and mental health access. Most of these measures allow our students to tap into existing programs for food services. For instance, AB 1894 by Assemblymember Shirley Weber, which is found on page 4 of your report, builds upon her previous efforts to increase certain students' ability to utilize CalFresh benefits on campus for hot meals. Various authors have also introduced bills to expand the use of existing mental health program dollars to meet the needs of both K-12 and higher education students. For example, SB 1004 by Senator Scott Wiener, found on page 2 of your report, authorizes the use of resources generated by the Mental Health Services Act at California's colleges and universities to improve mental health outreach, programs, and services offered to students. The final trend that I would note are measures dealing with sexual harassment and assault. These measures are primarily focused on the legislature, but others impact both public and private employees as well as higher education. AB 1896 by Assembly Member Sabrina Cervantes, found on page 4 of your report, is the one with the most direct impact to CSU. This bill clarifies that sexual assault counselors at the CSU and UC enjoy privileged rights, which allows them to have confidential conversations with students who access these services. While some bills clearly detail their purpose, at this early stage in the legislative process, many are not fully developed. It may not yet be clear what the author is intending to accomplish, or whether we can come to a mutually agreeable resolution of any concerns. As a result, you will see pending listed as our current position on many pieces of legislation. Finally, I'd like to note that we're at the beginning of the legislative process for the year, and committee hearings just began last week, and many bills were introduced in spot bill format, meaning that they're in a kind of placeholder form and reflect only intent language or propose only non-substantive changes to law. We expect that many of these bills will be amended in the coming weeks, and accordingly, many of our pending bill positions will change. My staff will spend the next several weeks meeting with legislative offices, informing, clarifying, and suggesting changes where appropriate. And as in years past, this is where my staff will likely be the most productive, as they effectively work with legislative members and staff to modify or halt legislation. Thank you. We will keep you apprised of our efforts as bills that impact the CSU, our students, faculty, and staff move through the legislative process. I'd now like to share some of our recent budget advocacy activities. In February and March, we held our first 2 Chancellor's Roundtable luncheons. This is the first time that our advocacy strategy has included the level of personal connection that these intimate gatherings afford. Our roundtable luncheons are an innovative advocacy activity and have proven to be a critical component of our overall strategy. As we expected, these luncheons and briefings are creating greater awareness of the CSU's contributions to the state and assisting us in making strong personal connections and building CSU champions among some of the most influential members of both houses. The first roundtable was co-hosted by Chancellor White and Senator Connie Leyva and focused on the CSU's contributions to the workforce. The conversation was robust, and several of the legislative members commented how much they appreciated the focused dialogue. The luncheon was followed by a staff briefing on this same topic, and we were very pleased that roughly 50 legislative staff attended and were able to hear from the presidents of Fresno State, San Jose State, Cal Poly Pomona, and San Bernardino about the unique ways their campuses meet regional workforce needs. In addition, several alumni and students shared how their CSU education prepared them for their career or provided them with hands-on experiences that were preparing them for a career after graduation. The second roundtable was co-hosted by Chancellor White and Senator Tony Atkins. The focus of this conversation was around system and campus efforts to meet students' basic needs, especially around food and housing insecurity. Attendees included the presidents of CSU Chico, Humboldt, Sonoma, Sacramento, and Fullerton. We were also pleased to be joined by members such as Assemblymember Weber and Assemblymember Limon, who have both been strong advocates on this issue and who play significant roles in the Assembly budget committees. Again, this roundtable was followed by a well-attended legislative staff briefing on the same day and topic. Members and staff learned about the CSU's efforts and commitment to understanding the prevalence of food and housing insecurity on our campuses, and system and campus leaders described unique programs and other campus efforts to ensure that students have access to nutritional food, emergency housing, and other aspects of overall student well-being. And while the luncheons focused on building connections and communication between our presidents, chancellor, and legislators, our CSSA, Alumni Council, and faculty have been important participants in our staff briefings. These events have been very successful in telling the CSU story, building relationships, and creating greater awareness of our significant contributions to the state. At the suggestion of our Governmental Relations Committee Chair and Vice Chair, we have included a trustee in each of these roundtables and briefings, allowing them to experience these advocacy activities firsthand. And as you saw in our opening slide and can see in this slide, our workforce events included Trustee Norton, and our basic needs event included Trustee Kimball. With the success of these first two events, our staff is now engaged in planning the third and final roundtable discussion, which will occur in early May. I'd now like to turn to our one Sacramento system-wide event, CSU Advocacy Day, which was held on March 7th. We were pleased that delegations from nearly every CSU campus participated in this year's event, and participants included presidents, students, staff, faculty, community members, and alumni. Each campus delegation met with their local Senate and Assembly members to discuss the need and rationale for additional investment in the CSU, and additionally, we organized several meetings with key legislators and small groups of campus presidents. The purpose of these meetings was to share CSU's budget requests, but also to discuss topics of mutual interest to the member and the campuses. These included meetings with the chairs of the ethnic caucuses and the Women's Caucus. We were also pleased that leaders from CSSA, the Academic Senate, CFA, and CSUEU joined Chancellor White in meetings with legislative leadership. This team met with Assemblymember Speaker Rendon, you can see in the photo, Senate Pro Tem Designee Tony Atkins, Senator Anthony Portantino, Chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Education, and Assemblymember Phil Ting, the Chair of the Assembly Budget Committee. The united voice of CSU stakeholder groups has been one of CSU's strongest advocacy points in recent years, and this year was no different. Thank you to the leaders of these organizations for their collaboration in making the collective case for additional investment in the CSU. I'd also like to acknowledge Trustee Eisen and Trustee Norton, who, together with Chancellor White, participated in our CSU Advocacy Day and met directly with Governor Brown. The culminating event of the day was a reception held in the Governor's Council Room, and attending were campus delegations, numerous members of the legislature, and legislative staff. During the event, we recognized Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula and Assembly Higher Education Chief Consultant Janice Warden-Washington with CSU Champion Awards. This is the first time that we've awarded this recognition. Our effectiveness in Sacramento relies on partnership with legislative members and staff, and we recognize that it's important to acknowledge the work of those in the Capitol who go above and beyond in their work to assist the CSU. As you may recall, Assemblymember Arambula authored our Doctorate of Nursing Practice bill last year. Successfully seeing that bill to law took great effort, and given the importance of the bill for our nursing programs, we felt it was an appropriate recognition of the Assemblymember and his office. Janice Warden-Washington, Chief Consultant of the Assembly Higher Education Committee, guides committee members as they make policy decisions that impact the CSU. And Janice carries out her duties with an open mind, is fair and balanced in her work, and frequently engages our staff to get a deeper understanding of the proposed policy. For these reasons, she is deserving of this recognition. We look forward to continued acknowledgement of our many CSU champions in the Capitol in the future. All new bills introduced this year must be heard in March and April, making this the busiest time of the year for policy committees. And as a result, my staff will be heavily engaged with members and legislative staff in the coming weeks. And at the same time, we will be actively working with Assistant Vice Chancellor Ryan Storm and Chancellor's Office staff to continue the implementation of our budget advocacy plan, including preparation for budget and informational hearings, and continued communication with key legislative staff and members. Trustee Norton, that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'd like to make a comment. I have a question and then another comment. My comment, first of all, is to express my thanks to you and the members of your staff. I can only imagine the intestinal fortitude which was required to read through 2,300 bills and the perspicacity to identify the 436 that are now being tracked. I also want to thank the other members of the CSU community who, from their organizations, joined us in Sacramento on March the 7th. My quick question has to do with an item on our summary. It is AB 1830, Post-Secondary Education, Career Placement and Job Search Services for Graduates. The bill requires post-secondary institutions to provide baccalaureate degrees to offer current, that provide baccalaureate degrees to offer career and job placement services at no cost for 5 years after graduation. Do we have an estimation of the costs at this time? And does the bill, as currently drafted, provide funding for those services?
As currently drafted, the bill doesn't provide any funding for those services, and certainly those are issues that we raised in testimony around the bill. I think that we have varying levels of service that our campuses are able to provide alumni, and that some do now. The bill, since being noticed in the agenda item, was heard in the Assembly Higher Education Committee. We did testify to our concerns about resources. And the bill did pass out by a vote of 13-0, but it is now going to the Fiscal Committee, the Assembly Appropriations Committee, where we will have another opportunity to highlight the cost to the system of complying with the provisions of the bill. We also continue to engage in conversations with the author's office to make sure that they're aware of the cost concerns that we have.
Well,
But I don't actually have the dollar amount with me today.
well, as it goes before the Fiscal Committee, I am reminded of the Latin adage, qui habat auras audiendi audiat, which roughly translates means, those who have ears, let them hear. Let's see, my other comment is, as you indicated, I did have a chance to participate in the first roundtable luncheon. I was struck by the fact that Senator Leyva and several others commented on how useful and informative they found the discussion that day, and it seemed clear to me that all of the legislators who were present left with a greater appreciation of the vital role that the CSU plays in the state of California. And maybe, Lillian, did you have a comment on?
Yeah, I felt that the legislators were all very sympathetic and listened closely, and it was a good day. Hopefully, they will put the money where their mouths are.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Jorge? Becky? Jack? Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Garrett. I'm really glad to hear all these updates and really hopeful for what's to come. I did want to talk on AB 2248. I know right now we're currently waiting to see what's going on with it, like we're pending our support or opposition. But I definitely want us all to think about this bill. I see it as a penalty to low-income students. Our students are already working 20 to 55 hours a week just to make ends meet. And they're taking 12 units and still suffering from food insecurity or any other issue that they have. With that being said, also our students who are getting Cal Grant A or Cal Grant B are still graduating with debt. So forcing them to take 15 units to receive Cal Grant A or B would really hurt them. And I really hope we can all agree that although the graduation initiative does encourage students to graduate in 4 years and take 15 units, forcing them to do that because of money is actually going to affect them more.
I appreciate your comments, and frankly, those are many of the concerns that internally we've discussed and that we've shared with the author. We are continuing to work with the author's office to see if we can resolve some of those concerns, because clearly under graduation initiative, we are trying to move to students taking 15 units, but to quote you, I think that what we've been focused on are incentives rather than penalties. So we will continue our engagement, but understand the concerns of the students.
Thank you. Thank you.
Becky?
There was mention made by one of our speakers earlier of something called the College for All Act, and it sounded like it was some kind of a measure that was being proposed for the ballot. Do you know anything about that, or can tell us anything about it?
No, I can follow up with you. I'm not sure. I know we've seen a couple of different ballot measures that are circulating, but it's not clear to me what might have been referred to in public testimony, but I'll research that and follow up with you.
Thank you.
And I have Jack, John, Peter, and Adam.
I would just repeat my mantra of unfunded mandates and our hopeful opposition to any. I know there's some political sensitivities with some of these, but the legislature feels it's important to pass the bill. They ought to figure out a way to provide the funding. My second question is on the SB 1225, the $4 billion Bond Act. What is the source of revenue for the debt service on that?
So as the bill is drafted, the state would be paying the debt service on that. That is a very appropriate question because I think that given recent changes in the way that we fund our capital needs, it is not helpful to us to issue general obligation bonds and then have the CSU have to pay the debt service out of our general fund appropriation. This bill is almost identical to a bill introduced by Senator Glazer last year, with the exception that it's about double the amount of general obligation bond that's being authorized. And we engaged in conversations with the senator to be clear about the concern around the debt service costs. And so the bill does make it clear that it is the state that is paying the debt service, not the institution.
Maybe it would be clear if it said the state and not the CSU system.
Well, we can try.
Okay.
John.
Very quickly, and in addition to what both you, Larry, and Jack said, with regard to the fiscal impact, perhaps you could actually include a bullet point that says CSU fiscal impact. So as we look at these summaries, we can say, oh yeah, that has no impact, or that may have an impact, or that has a significant impact. Just something to ease our ability to know what's included in that bill. Thank you.
Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was intrigued by AB 2479 on income sharing agreements by Assemblyman Vopel. I've done a lot of reading on ISAs and followed the Purdue experiment in this space very closely. I'd appreciate it if this gets legs, that you let me know how it tracks. There are a lot of interesting arguments in favor of ISAs, but an awful lot of devil in the detail kind of challenges in implementing them. The one right above, AB 2408, boy, sure seems like dead center in the responsibility of the academic senate and academic leadership on our campuses. And that one's a little bit worrisome. Another one that I would love to be kept up to date on, because that really does seem like an inappropriate intrusion into the academic enterprise. And then lastly, a question actually on a bill from last year, SB 85, the campus hunger, hunger-free campus legislation that we got some money out of, correct?
That's right. So the Assemblymember Limon had introduced that bill, and it was going through the legislative process. But ultimately, the language of her bill was absorbed into the budget, and I believe it was 2 million, maybe 2.5 million, 2.5 million.
Could I
that's
get
been distributed.
Could I get a quick summary on how we spent our 2.5 million? Because UC got some money also, right?
I'm not sure about UC, but I know that we had an RFP. It'd be very easy for our academic services folks to get you some background on that.
Yeah, just a little summary on how we spend our money.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam?
Just in the interest of time, we're all looking at specific bills, but one issue I'll be working on more with the Chancellor's Office staff and reaching out to some campus presidents as well as community groups is mental health. So I'd like to specifically look into SB 1004. I've already been talking to a couple of counties and their staff about mental and behavioral health issues, and I'm formulating some ideas to bring to this board. But that would be interesting to see more information on.
Ugo and then Jane.
Yeah, my question's about the same bill that Mr. Taylor addressed, and that's AB 2479 on an income share agreement. And how do the proponents suggest that would be enforced after graduation? Do you have anything to share on that?
Yeah, I think, again, most of these bills are at the very early stages, so a lot of those details are not addressed in the bill. Since being introduced, the bill has been amended now to direct the UC and the CSU to select a campus to participate in the pilot program. But I think a lot of these questions are the kinds of things that my staff will engage with the members on, because most of the bills are pretty much a framework of a concept at this point and not fully developed. So I couldn't answer specifically how it's addressing that. I would say that at this point, the bill doesn't address that.
Jane?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kathleen, in light of our discussion earlier in the agenda and some other committees, I hope you will find a way to work into your advocacy the fact that in response to the legislative requirements from the legislature, we adopted the graduation initiative, and so far the students have paid for it, and that the redirection, another legislative mandate, is going to have another price tag of $16 to $20 million. You know, I think they really need to understand this. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Wenda?
Yes, with AB 2505, California State University Budget Oversight Policies, what is the current policy?
So I'm wondering if I might defer that over to our budget and finance folks to talk about our current policy.
We currently have each of the campuses provide budget information to us, and we monitor it on a regular basis, and are in contact with the campuses on a regular basis. So I'm not that familiar with what the intent of this bill is, but it is what it is.
Because I assume you're already making reports. Yeah. And this is asking to make reports, and every 3 years thereafter. Okay.
Yeah, the campuses do make reports to us, but this may ask that additional reports be made to the legislature, perhaps.
Any other comments or questions? If not, Chair Day, that concludes the business of the Committee on Governmental Relations.
Thank you, Chair.